Alright guys, it's time to broaden our understanding of chess, and so in this video we're going to learn about one of the greatest defenses of all time, the French defense steeped in history. That is of course e4, e6, and I'm calling this theory versus reality. Of course we are going to look at the theoretical moves of top players, grandmasters. However, the reality part of this means that we are going to focus on the most popular moves found in the Lichess database. This is a database of hundreds of millions of online games, just basically me and you playing. And if you are like me outside of the elite level, 1700-1800chess.com, 1900, 2000 Lichess, quite frankly, you're not going to see 10, 15 moves of theory. But what you're going to be interested in if you play an opening is, where is this game likely to go? What are the common responses? And so with that, let's make a few introductory points about this. We're not going to go to a load of depth. You can study the depth, so we're just going to keep this quite broad. The vast majority of games are going to go d4, d5. And so the first thing to understand here is that if I were to switch on the Masters database here, so I'll show you the Masters database, so I'll go over to Masters, you can see that over 80% of games go with 3 knights e3, 3 knight d2. And so these are the critical lines. You can see further down e5, advanced variation, 10%, e takes d5, exchange variation, hardly played, bishop d3, 1%, I believe Magnus Carlsen played that and lost. But what you can see is that hardly any games go with the advanced or exchange. Now you take nothing away from this video, take this much away, which is that when you toggle over to the Lichess database, this is now just me and you playing. And what I've done here is I've left everything on, all the filters except for bullet games, because quite frankly there's a lot of pre-moving going on. And what you see now on the screen is an inversion of this. You can see that the vast majority of games go with e5, the advanced variation, e takes d5, exchange. And the critical lines, 3 knight c3, 3 knight d2, the Tarrasch, okay, they're played but less often. And so one of the things to understand about the French is that if you're outside of the elite level, the more low rated you are going to have to face a lot of advance or a lot of exchange variations. I would say the numbers are misleading, and in fact the reality is that you're going to have to face even more than what's suggested in Lichess. Why is that? Because after e4, e6, many games at the lower level go knight f3. And now after d5, your opponent is most likely going to play e5 or e takes d5, in which case you're going to transpose into advanced and exchange variation. And so you're going to see this stuff over and over again. Now, a few ways to look at this. You could say happy days. This reduces the amount of work you have to do. But on the other hand, it can become very dull. Also note that after d4, you can play e6 anyway and offer your opponent a transposition into the French. And if they decide to play c4, well, you can just play some other major opening like the Queen's Gambit decline. And with that, let's rock and roll. Let's get into this. Okay, so the most popular move in the Lichess database here is going to be e5, the advanced variation. And so the key idea here is to play c5, undermine white's center here. It's a common idea in many openings. You'll see this in the Kara Khan here, where the e-pawn has been advanced and we try to undermine using the c-file. And so one of the problems here for white is going to be the development of this light square bishop. What you'll see is that it pretty much has only one square e2. And you'll say, no, I can put it on d3, which is what a lot of lower rated players will want to do. They want to attack the h7 square, make it active, or maybe they want to play b5. But what you're going to see is that it's very, very difficult for white to play this type of move. And this is the reason why black is doing fine. There's basically no threat from this opening. And so after c5, most popular move in the Lichess is going to be c3. So we're going to be following Anish Giri's chessable course. You can go ahead and buy that. There's a free, short, and sweet version. Knight c6, knight f3. And here, critical move, queen b6, pressurizing the d4 pawn and pressurizing the b2 pawn as well, which is quite annoying. And in this position, getting back to this light square bishop, there is just an issue here now. The most popular move in the Lichess database is bishop to d3. And there is a reason why players do this. They want to trap your queen. You can see here it's telling me 1 in 4 players try bishop d3 outside of bullet games. And so they go for the classic trap. Okay, so they play bishop d3. We have cd, cd. And now this is just a poison pawn. You cannot take. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop b5, check, wins the queen. Classic trap. However, after cd, cd, people say the French is bad because there's a light squared bishop is stuck behind the pawn chain. However, ironically, this bishop can now play a role in bringing down the d4 pawn, potentially. And so there's a saying in chess, behind every queen, there is a great light squared bishop. And here, there is going to be no check now. And so this pawn is just plain and simple hanging. And you can see the utility of this move, queen to b6. If they decide to defend it, this is just a free pawn. Free pawn. You can go ahead and take it. Obviously, people are concerned about when are these b pawns poisoned. Here, you can go ahead and take it. And so in this position, white just has to go back. Bishop e2. And herein lies my point. When white elects to play the advanced variation, they have this issue around the light square bishop where basically the only square they can go to is e2, which is quite passive. And so if we go back to this position, they should have just really played that in the first place, not wasting time in the game. And now we have CD, CD. And the idea is going to be to continue to pressurize this d4 pawn. Now, if we go into the Lichess database again, I think that a lot of lower rated players make a mistake here, or where they play this move knight on g to e7. And it's understandable, okay? It's understandable. Why do they want to play knight on g to e7? Because they want to go to f5 and pressurize the d4 pawn. However, it's easily refuted by this move knight to a3 and then c2. So knight f5, c2, and white has adequate control over the d4 pawn, or defense of the d4 pawn, excuse me. Now, what you could try actually in this position, I think Anish Giri talks about in some of his French defense lectures online, I'll put a screenshot up on the screen right now for you, is just move knight to h6. And in this position, knight to a3, sequence c2 doesn't work because you have the option now of just taking, which is really annoying. Really, really annoying for white. And in this position, we won't go into a huge level of depth. The position can get sharp, so you do need to study it a bit. The three most popular moves in the Lichess database, put up on the screen right now, are castles, bishop takes h6, and knight to c3. Okay, and there's something to be said about all of these. And so after castles, we just have this knight f5, and we have a lot of activity and pressure here on this d4 square. And in this position, if they elect to play bishop to e3, let's say, for example, you can just go ahead and take. I believe black is in a winning position. If they go ahead and play something like knight to c3, they don't want to see the queen advancing along the queen side here like this, then you can go ahead and take here on d4. And so it's quite a pleasant position. Alternatively, in this position, if you have bishop takes h6, the critical move here is queen takes b2. You've got to play this move, where you're basically saying, okay, I've pinched a pawn, and now your bishop is hanging and your rook is hanging. And in this position, many players will just take, they'll try to get their pawn back, but we have activated our dark square bishop now. Bishop takes g7. We also have the bishop pair. White doesn't. The rook is hanging. They play something like knight to d2, and we can just go ahead and take this pawn. And if white decides to take, which most probably many players are going to do, they want to save their light square bishop, then here, queen takes d4, black is totally winning. But these positions are sharp because in this position, if you play bishop takes e5, then white is winning. So you need to study this a bit. Now, in this position, probably the sensible thing for white to do is just to develop the knight here, the only square here, knight to d2, excuse me, knight on b to d2. We take the bishop, and it's game on. And your upper pawn, you do have these double isolated rook pawns, and you need to think about whether you're going to take this pawn or not. The engine doesn't say black is winning or anything, and so it's down to you. How greedy do you want to be? Remember, in fast time controls, it can be difficult to play accurately in positions like this. And so one final move in this position is knight to c3. And depending on how you look at this, this could just end in a draw. So after, say, something like knight to f5, you have this here where we're attacking the queen. And there can be a threefold repetition here where we have queen to a5, the knight goes back, and then you're just basically going to repeat this position to a draw. Okay, so the second most popular move in the Lichess database is going to be e takes d5, the exchange variation. Let's toggle here to the Lichess database here. So some almost 20 million games which are bullet. And so after e takes d5, so ed, ed, people hate this because they say it's boring, because now you have something like knight f3, knight f6, bishop d3, bishop d6, and it's just symmetry and it's annoying. Okay, now Anish Giri in his course, instead of bishop d6, looks at this move c5, which I think is really useful even to lower rated players. The reason being is that the most popular move in the lead chess database is now castles. And here, once again, this bishop is going to have a problem getting on an active diagonal. Because now you have this move c4. It's very annoying. And the accurate way to play this position for white is to play rook e1 check, bishop e7, and give the bishop an escape square here on f1. And many people will just leave it here on e2 though. That's the kind of top level way of playing this. You have something like castles, b3, takes, and white has ideas of playing c3, c4 maybe. And okay, you can investigate this. We're going to play stuff like bishop g4, knight c6, and it's game on. Alternatively, in this position, if your opponent decides to just go ahead and take, we have d takes c5. Okay, so the downside of playing c5 like that is that you end up with an isolated pawn. Just understand that ultimately in the endgame, this is a weakness. However, both sides have the bishop pair. It's an open position, it's active position. Let's face it, games outside of the elite level, they're just going to end in some kind of blunder, some tactic. And so you need not worry about this. Your position is quite active. This bishop is quite useful on this diagonal. And yeah, you can get your pieces mobilized in a sensible way. Alternatively, in this position, after c5, your opponent could just play this move c3. And now notice that c4 isn't as useful because your opponent has this move bishop to c2, which keeps their bishop on the diagonal. Instead, perhaps what you should look at is to play moves like bishop e7, knight c6, maybe bishop g4, that kind of stuff. If I go here into the Masters database, you can see not many games, but you can see here, yeah, bishop e7, 14 games. Black has done really well here, winning some 64% of them. So maybe the most sensible thing here, bishop e7, castles, is the way to go. Okay, so the third most popular move in the lead chess database is going to be knight to c3. It's going to get quite critical here. Giri recommends this move, bishop to b4. We enter the Winawer variation of the French. And you're going to have to know some stuff here because typically white is going to try and get its queen to g4 and pressurize the black king side. Now, for this reason, I think if we go into the Masters database, let's switch it on right again. You can see here that, yeah, some title players go with bishop b4, Winawer variation, but then a whole bunch, the other half, go with knight to f6. And so if you prefer knight to f6 or you want to learn about it, maybe have a look at the Chess Dojo guys. I believe they have some videos on it. And so in this position, after bishop to b4, we have here the most popular move in the chess database is e5, e takes d5. We'll look at that. E takes d5 looks pretty harmless from a low-level perspective. Here, after e5, we want to counter again in center with this move c5, quite thematic. Here, most players are going to play this move a3. We have here bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and in this position, knight to e7. And here, queen g4, threatening to take the g7 pawn. And what Giri talks about in this position is just developing your queen side. Okay, so we're going to play queen c7, knight c6, and keep this harmonious. And if white decides to gobble up 2 pawns, you're going to get your material back. That's the key point. So after queen to c7, the vast majority of players in the lead chess database is telling me here now 73% greedy people play this move queen takes g7. We have here rook g8. They gobble up another pawn. You're like, damn, I'm down 2 pawns. Don't worry, you're going to get your 2 pawns back. Because in this position, we have here c takes d4, getting 1 pawn back, but we're also going to get this pawn back as well. White has no time for this kind of stuff because of this deadly check here. And so in this position, obviously knight to f3 is a blunder because of the check. They have to play this move knight to e2. And you can see white has some development issues here. The bishops are kind of sleeping. And now many players in this position in the lead chess database just go ahead and take. Okay, you don't need to. So what Giri talks about in his course is playing this move knight on b to c6, just develop. It's a theme or feature of top players is that they delay the recapture of pawns. And here, it doesn't really matter what white does. Black is going to get its second pawn back. And so, for example, if you have something like bishop to b2, we just have takes, and if they take, then we have this takes as well. Or in this position, if they decide to take here, so let's say you have c takes d4, we can have knight takes d4, and if white decides to do this, this is of course a deadly check as well. And so you see, you get your 2 pawns back. And it should just be a case of developing on the queen side, maybe castling long. And so alternatively in this position, instead of e5, about 1 in 5 players play this move, e takes d5, but here I couldn't see anything critical around this. It seemed quite easy for low rated players to deal with this. After e takes d5, bishop g3, it just looks like normal development. Knight f6. Here a3 takes, castles. Or maybe in this position, after knight f6, this move, yeah, it just looks like normal chess from here on in. Okay, so the 4th most popular move in the Lichess database is knight to d2, the Tarrasch variation. And so the difference between this and say knight to c3 is that bishop b4 is not really an idea now because we can bat the bishop away with c3. And so instead, thematic move here in the French, c5, strike in the center. And here just notice that there are a whole bunch of people in the Lichess database, let's actually put up on the screen again, who do play this move c3, okay? It's not really that harmful. When I was looking at this, maybe look at it yourself, nothing really happens here. You just kind of take and take and take and take and something, okay? It's not really critical. The critical thing is if white decides to take this pawn here on d5, which is what they should do. Now we can activate our queen. Queen takes d5, and notice the downside of developing your knight like this is that there is no knight to c3 stealing a tempo. Here you could say bishop c4 might do that, but a lot of players won't want to do this because this basically ends in a queen exchange. We have queen takes g2, queen f3, saving your rook, and then maybe takes. Okay, so the vast majority of people in this position are going to play knight on g to f3. We take, and just note that we are not up a pawn. We have to give this back. Don't try to hold on to this pawn. You probably end up losing the game. In this position, bishop c4, don't go all the way back. Try to keep your position active. Queen to d6. Top players playing castles, knight f6, just develop, knight b3, knight to c6. You can see this pawn is triple attacked. It has to fall. Knight takes d4. White gets his pawn back. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4. And here is something to investigate is bishop e7, a6. Both appear to be moves, but you can see that the board has opened up. Both sides have the bishop pair. And I guess you're going to have to know things here. And so obviously, the stronger you are as a player, the more likely you are to see this type of variation. And very finally, there's a few sidelines worth mentioning in this position. The 5th most popular move in the Lichess database is bishop to d3. I only mention this because Carlsen played this once. I believe he lost that game. Put a link to it in the description below. And in this position, it doesn't really look... Oh, I couldn't understand why this was so difficult for people outside the elite level. Let's say you have d takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight f6, very natural, threatening to take the bishop pair. It seems the idea in this opening is to play bishop to f3 and pressurize this diagonal. And okay, maybe the things you want to do here is bishop e7, c5. Okay, if you have a view on this, put it in the comments below. I couldn't see why black was getting into a lot of trouble with this. A more dangerous line in fast time controls online is after e4, e6 if people play this b3 sideline. It's quite annoying, I think, if you are a French player, because this bishop is coming here. It's going to pressurize the king side where maybe you are hoping to castle. And so in this position after d5, many players are going to play bishop b2, and if you decide to take, they're going to then play knight to c3, basically gambiting a pawn. After you try to defend, they're just going to play this move g4 or queen e2, and white's position is starting to get very active. It's quite annoying. Instead, I think what Giri talks about in his course in this position is knight to c6. And what he's saying is that if your opponent plays this move knight to c3, you can go ahead and play d4. They play knight on c to e2, and then you have e5, and then you shut down the bishop. But if you actually look inside the Lichess database, the vast majority of people in this position will take, and then you still have this issue around the bishop. We're going to play knight f6, bishop b7. Okay, maybe bishop d7, maybe bishop b5 is going to happen. It's quite an open position and something that you're going to have to study. Quite a dangerous sideline. And so with that, thank you very much for your time.